Yes. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the class on Revelation. If you're watching online, I want to say welcome to you. Again, we want to say our thanks to Mark, who taught last week. Let's give him another hand. Good job. We appreciate that. I can hear all of our online viewers clapping as well, so good job. Good job. Tonight we're going to be in chapter 17 and chapter 18. So let's pray, and then we'll jump back into our study. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for John, who was able to communicate what you wanted him to communicate. And we understand and know exactly what you want us to understand and know from this book. Lord, much of it is symbolism, much of it is literal, much of it is a little bit difficult to understand. So we're grateful for the chance to try once again to understand exactly what you've been wanting to communicate to us. But in the broad strokes, we know that you're in control and that you're bringing justice on the earth at the end of time. Thank you for this study tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So let's just quickly review as we do each week. And let's just start with John again. John is the author of the book of Revelation. He wrote in the first century, and he was the youngest of the disciples. He was told to write about three things, to write about things that were taking place in his timeline, which was things, according to chapter 1, verse 19, things that have taken place, which is chapter 1, and then things that are, which is the seven churches in chapter 2 and chapter 3. We saw in chapter 1 through 3 the seven stars, the seven lampstands, and the seven churches. You'll notice the consistency of the number 7. And then John fast forwards till the end of the church age, which we're in right now, so it's to our future. And he writes about the great tribulation that lasts for 7 years. And in chapter 4 and verse 1 and 2, John is called to step out of where he's at and to step up into heaven and to write the events of the tribulation as he sees them taking place in real time. And in the tribulation, we see the 7 seal judgments, the 7 trumpet judgments, the 7 bowl judgments, chapters 4 through 18. And tonight we're going to be wrapping up the tribulation. Tonight's the last 2 chapters that discuss that. And then John fast forwards to the end of the 1,000-year reign of Christ, which comes after the tribulation. And he writes about the transition from the 1,000-year reign of Christ into what we call eternity future, or the new heavens and the new earth. And that's chapters 19 through 22. We see the final things, new heaven and new earth, and eternity in the future. So what we learn from this is God's well thought out, planned out justice upon the earth. That's what the book of Revelation is all about. And we have to remember that John is describing futuristic events through a first century world understanding and vocabulary. So he's doing the best he can. He's doing the best he can. It's important for us also to remember the next sheet in your handout. Let's remind ourselves again, and we go over this every week because I want it to be ingrained in your mind before you leave the class, so that next time you read through Revelation, you'll remember the 2 storylines. The first storyline and the second storyline all converge in chapter 19 and 20 at the millennial kingdom of Jesus. So we see in chapters 4 through 11, John wrote to us on storyline number 1, which is the story or the understanding of how God brings his justice upon the earth with the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls. Chapters 4 through 11 talk about these. And then we saw in chapter 12 through 14, John switches to the second storyline of Revelation, which is not chronological, but it's more about themes, what's happening on the earth. While God is bringing all of these judgments and justice down upon the earth, what's happening on the earth during that time, that's storyline number 2. And those events are not described to us necessarily in chronological order because they're around different themes. So in chapters 12 through chapter 14, we saw the theme that John was telling us what was happening on the earth, and Satan was there. And then we saw last week, John jumps back up to storyline number 1, and Mark walked us through the 7 bowl judgments in chapters 15 and 16. And did you notice something different about the description of the bowl judgments? Several times they were called the bowls of God's wrath. The bowls of God's wrath. I went back and looked, and the seals were never called the seals of God's wrath or the trumpets of God's wrath. So the bowl judgments seem to have really been motivated by God himself and his vengeful justice upon the earth. And I think as we talk a little bit about the future, that's going to be important for us maybe to remember. And then tonight, John is jumping back down to storyline number 2, and we're going to be talking about Satan's activity, or what's happening to Satan in the world here on earth while God is doing what he does in heaven. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight in chapter 17 and chapter 18. And then next week we're going to jump back up because John jumps back up in chapter 19, at least the first part of chapter 19, and tells us some things that are happening in chronological order, what happens to Satan and what God is doing there. And then in the last part of chapter 19 and the first part of chapter 20, John takes another step back down to thematics, and then we go into the millennial kingdom. All right, does that make sense? So that helps us understand why all the events in Revelation are not necessarily in chronological order. Now, chapter 17 and chapter 18, along with chapters 12 through 14, are some of the most difficult chapters to understand. There's a lot of symbolism given to us, or given to the readers. So what we're excited about in chapters 17 and 18, just as we were in chapters 12 through 14, is that John's going to tell us what things mean. He's going to tell us some things, and then he's going to interpret them for us. Isn't that wonderful? Because if he hadn't interpreted them for us, we would have a really hard time understanding what they mean. And so John's going to do that for us. So in chapters 14 and chapter 17 and chapter 18. We're going to be talking tonight about the destruction of Babylon. Babylon. Let me ask you a question. What is the first prominent city mentioned in the Bible? The first prominent city mentioned in the Bible. The Tower of Babel. Okay? Genesis chapter 11. The word Babel is literally Babylon. And at that time in history, what were the people trying to do at the Tower of Babel? They were trying to build a tower to reach God. God had told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and what? Fill the earth. They did the exact opposite. Well, they were fruitful and they multiplied, but they stayed in the same area, speaking the same language. And when God looked down in Genesis chapter 11, he says, uh-oh, there's nothing impossible for these people if they all set their mind to it. But these folks were trying to build a tower to God. Now, we could innocently say that this tower was just some architectural achievement. But if we look at God's response to the Tower of Babel, we will know what the true heart of the people were. What did God do at the Tower of Babel? He dispersed them, right? He destroyed the temple, he destroyed the tower, and he gave groups of people their different languages so they couldn't speak to each other. So they had to cluster together in their language groups, and they eventually migrated out, and that's what built the nations of the world. Okay? The nations of the world were birthed through the Tower of Babel experience. Now, at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, by the time we get to Genesis chapter 11, what have we already seen in Genesis? Well, in Genesis, we saw creation, chapters 1 and 2. In Genesis, we saw the fall and the serpent in chapter 3. And in Genesis, we see the great flood in chapters 8 through chapter 10. So if the people at the Tower of Babel all had the same history of creation, fall, flood, and then they get dispersed from the Tower of Babel into the nations of the world, guess what they're all taking with them? A story of what? Creation, fall, flood. One of the criticisms of Christianity and Judaism is that there are cultures older than the Jewish nation that have a creation story, a fall story, and a flood story, and the Jewish people just stole it from them. That's not true. Every people group should have a creation story, a fall story, and a flood story, because they all come back to the Tower of Babel when they're dispersed. Does that make sense? Okay? But God looked down on the hearts of those people in the city of Babel, and he said, that is the seed of all wickedness. For all time, what was going on in Babel is the origin of all global national evils. Whether it's immorality, whether it's pride, whether it's greed, whether it's witchcraft and Satan worship, all of the evil that has penetrated the nations of the earth are traced back to Babel or Babylon. So now we come to the end of time, and we come to Genesis chapter 17 and chapter 18, and we see the destruction of Babylon. And it's really a destruction of all of the evils of the nations. And there's primarily two. In chapter 17, we see the destruction of all false religion. Has false religion been impactful to our nations? Think of all the false religions that have been perpetrated in nations throughout history. How many have there been? Okay? We have so many false religions that have been pervasive among the nations since the Tower of Babel. And what we're going to see tonight is, as a whole, all false religions are crushed. God brings judgment not on a particular people group or on a particular nation, but he brings judgment on the false religions of the world that all started back in Babel. That's why he's saying he's destroying Babylon tonight. Okay? In chapter 18, we're going to see the greedy economic and political systems of the world. Have there been evil political systems in the world throughout history? Okay. Are there any around today? Are we living in one of them? I mean, are there greedy, discriminatory, hurtful economic systems in the world today? Does corporations take advantage of people? Do dictators take economic advantage of people? In chapter 18, we're going to see all of that smashed by God. That too is labeled Babylon, because it all started in the Tower of Babel. Okay? In that part of the world. So we're going to see an end to the tribulation tonight. The tribulation ends at the end of chapter 18. And we're going to see the crushing of Babylon as a false religion and Babylon as an evil economic political system. We're going to see the smashing of those. And essentially, Babel and Babylon is the work of Satan on the earth throughout human history. As Satan has had his way, what he has primarily done for the last 6,500 years of human history is he has perverted religion and he's perverted the economic, political systems of the world, all to be harmful instead of good as God intended them to be. And so he's going to destroy them and, in essence, destroy the work of Satan on the earth that he's been perpetrating over the last 6,500 years. And then in chapter 19 and chapter 20, we're going to see the destruction of Satan himself. But now, tonight, we're just going to have the destruction of his two empires. You know, it's interesting. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, calls Satan the god of this world. Okay? For some reason, in God's divine plan, he gave the devil a lot of leash. And the devil has taken advantage of every inch of it. And he's not only tempted individuals and tried to hurt families, he's actually been the leader of nations throughout human history. He's the god of this world, small g. We also see in John chapter 12 and verse 31 that he's called the ruler of this world. So when you see evil people doing evil things, you know who is behind it. Ultimately, the devil is behind all the evil that is perpetrated on people, either through false religions or economic, political powering. And Satan is behind it. He's called the ruler of this world. And in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, it says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against what? Principalities and powers. Where? In the heavenly places, which is Satan's domain. So your greatest enemy here on earth, my greatest enemy here on earth, is not that person that's mean to me. It's not that boss that doesn't take care of me. It's the devil. He is our greatest enemy. And so we're going to see tonight that his work gets crushed, both for false religions and for terrible economic, political systems. All right? Does that make sense? That's where we're going to. That's what John's going to write about. He's going to write about. Remember, we already have on the scene the beast, and we have the false prophet are already on the scene, and they're going to be part of our scenario tonight. So as we go through this, we're going to try and take our time, and we're going to try and understand as much as we can. So let's jump into chapter 17. In chapter 17, what we find is we find a paragraph, verses 1 to 7, a vision of Babylon, and then we're going to get the interpretation of it. So let's read the vision, chapter 17 and verse 1 down through verse 7. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Now, many waters is a symbol of all the nations. Okay? So this harlot is influencing the nations. Look at verse 2. With whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. We're going to learn that her immorality here is false religion. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the beast. The beast has blasphemous names, 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman is not the same woman that we saw earlier that was representative of Israel. Verse 4, the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet. She was wealthy or honored very highly. That's her clothing. And adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. So she is a highly acclaimed, highly regarded woman. having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the who? So the saints. So this woman, who represents the false religions of the world, has as its target who? God's people. Okay? God's people. And with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? Well, we would all probably wonder, like, what in the world is this? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So we're grateful that this angel, who was one of the carriers of one of the 7 bowls, is going to now give John an interpretation. Okay, so here's the vision. The great harlot, it's another woman, and she is symbolic of the false religions throughout history. And you'll notice the kings of the earth commit acts of immorality. And again, if we ask ourselves the question, has false religion been pervasive among the nations throughout history? The answer would be what? Yes. And have the kings of those nations given themselves to the immoralities attached to those false religions? The answer would be yes. Yes. The people on earth are drunk with her wine. Okay, so the people on earth, the vast majority of them, are giving themselves to the false religions symbolized by this woman on the beast. And is it true that most people believe in a false religion as opposed to the true faith of Jesus Christ? Are we in the majority or the minority? All over the earth, we are in the minority. And so don't be surprised if we continue to get pushed to the margins. Don't be surprised if we continue to be in the minority. It's always going to be that way. It always has been that way. Because Satan is crafty, and he's been spreading false religions throughout all of human history, and he's done a pretty good job of getting people sucked into them. And then it says she looks glamorous, but she holds a cup full of abominations. Isn't that true of false religions? They look good on the outside, but when you really look on the inside, I mean, we look at some of the great tragedies, even in the last 100 years, in the name of false religion. We look at things, you know, like let's name a couple of crazy things that have happened in the name of religion. Jonestown, okay? We see all kinds of things in Waco, Texas. Okay, we see crazy things around the world, and if we look at the world religions today, they have a sense of sheen and glamour, but when you peel that back, and it's really just blasphemous truth that's being taught. She has a name on her forehead, and she's drunk herself with the blood of the saints, which again reminds us that Satan's ultimate target for all of his works, whether it's false religions or evil economic political systems, his target ultimately is God's people, whether it's the Jews or the Christians. You'll notice here the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? This beast represents the Antichrist. Okay? I'll give you a little bit of heads up because the angel is going to interpret this for us, and the best we can understand the angel's interpretation is the beast represents both the Antichrist and the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire. So let's look in verse 8 down through verse 13, and let's go through the interpretation of the dream. Here's what the angel says. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. So whatever this beast represents or symbolizes, it had a prominent place in the past, right? It was, It now is what? Not, which means it doesn't have a prominent place now, but it's going to have a prominent place in the future again, because it says there that he is about to come up out of the abyss. So whatever the beast is, it's had a very high point in the past. We don't see it much today, but it's going to be brought back. It's going to be brought back, and we're going to understand that to be the Roman Empire. It says, and those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. That's an interesting statement. That's us Christians. Christians will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. So Christians are going to wonder, who's the beast that was, that is not, but that's going to come again? All right? We're gonna see that is the Roman kingdom, the Roman Empire. Verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. Oh, thanks, angel. Okay? In order to understand this, you got to have some serious wisdom. Okay? If you really understand it, here it is. The 7 heads on this beast are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 what? Kings. Rome was described as the empire of 7 hills in history. So that's, if we try to place what the 7 heads represents, these are kings. Okay? 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he will remain for a little while. So we have 7 kings, 5 in the past. It says, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and another has not yet come. If we look at history at the time that John wrote this, history before John, there were 5 great empires. What were they? Egyptian Empire, Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Babylonian Empire. And by the time John wrote this, they were what? Fallen. They're gone. 1 is, he says, present tense. Who's the empire when John was writing this? Rome. Rome. And then 1 is yet to come. We think what he's referring to there is the empire of the Antichrist, the beast himself. Because look what it says. Okay? It says, the beast which was and is not is himself an 8th and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So the kingdom that is being talked about that was and is not and will come is finally the 7th kingdom, is the kingdom of the Antichrist, who's only going to stay for a little while, and then he's going to go to destruction. So the best we can understand the beast, it's a symbol of the Roman Empire that was after the 5 horns, the 5 kings of the ancient empires before Rome. Rome is the one that is, and then the Antichrist kingdom is the 7th one that's coming, because we're told here that the Antichrist is one of the 7. Okay? That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? The beast is from the abyss, so we know it's a satanic kingdom. It's on its way to destruction, so it's not going to be on the earth for very long. The 7 heads represent 7 mountains or 7 kingdoms, 7 kings. 5 are past, 1 is future, and the present one that he's talking about is the beast, or the future one is the beast. I have that wrong in your notes there. It says 5 past, 1 present. It should be Rome. The 1 future is beast. So you can change that in your notes there. I just noticed that I put that beast in the wrong place. I always put my beasts in the wrong place, okay? Now, that's the 7 heads. Verse 12 tells us what the 10 horns mean. 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. So when John wrote this, the 10 kings who are the 10 horns have not yet been revealed because they don't have a kingdom. So they're not past kings, they're not present kings, they're future kings. And it says, but they receive authority as kings from the who? From the beast. So we know that these 10 kings exist during the time of the beast, because the beast gives authority to them. Does that make sense? So when the Antichrist during the tribulation is really going full throttle, there are going to be 10 kings that serve him, and he gives authority to them. But it's short-lived. It's only for one what? 1 hour. Now, we don't really know what 1 hour, does that mean literally 1 hour? That doesn't make much sense. In the 7-year tribulation, given 10 kings authority for 1 hour. Most likely it just means a very short period of time. Okay? These have one purpose, these 10 kings, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So the beast that this woman is riding is a combination of the Antichrist and the evil kingdoms of the world history. Okay? And the 10 horns represent 10 kings that will be serving the beast during the time of the tribulation. All right, on your notes there, 10 horns equals 10 kings coming to help the beast. Now, these 10 kings and the beast, verse 14, these will wage war against the Lamb. Who's the Lamb? Jesus and his people. And the Lamb will overcome them because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Are the called and chosen and faithful. I just want to give you a little insight there. We are the called, the chosen, and the faithful. So whenever this is happening, he is the Lord there of us. So it's talking about Jesus. Verse 15, and he said to me, the angel said, the waters which you saw, remember, if you go back to verse 1, the great harlot who sits on many waters, what do the waters represent? We go to verse 15, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. That's why we know the waters, the many waters, represent all the nations of the earth, because John tells us that. Watch this now. And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot. Uh-oh. Catch that? The beast and the 10 horns, which are 10 kings, will hate the harlot. In the tribulation, there's going to be a time where God is going to use actually the beast himself to destroy the false religions of the world. Because we see here in verse 16, the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. So God, as the method of shattering all the false religions of the world, is somehow going to convince the beast and his 10 kings to destroy them. The world is going to turn against religion. That's what's going to happen. The world is going to turn against all religion and eat them up and spit them out. You think that maybe the world is starting to turn against Christianity? Well, what they're going to see at this particular time is all false religions are going to be smashed. Because the world, the human race, is going to believe that religion is the cause of all the problems. The 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls. The cause of all of that is religion. And so the harlot is going to be destroyed. How do we know that? Verse 17, for God has, this is so good, God has put in their hearts, who's there? The beast and the 10 kings, to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the word of God will be fulfilled. And here it is, the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now I put there in your notes, the woman, the great city, is what? Babylon. Okay, going back to the Tower of Babel, where all evil, false religions of the world would have their origin. So when God destroys Babylon, he's destroying all the false religions of the world. Make sense? Okay, best we can anyway. All right. That is chapter 17. Now, how long does that take? How long during the tribulation period? We know it's coming to an end. So we're in the second half of the tribulation. We might be like in year 6, the beginning of year 7. We know that when we get to the end of chapter 18, the tribulation is over. So we're nearing the end. So one of the last things that God orchestrates during the Great Tribulation is for the world to turn on religion as a whole and destroy it, which is destroying Satan's work. All right, chapter 18. Whew. Chapter 18. Chapter 18, we're going to see the destruction of a global economic political system. Let's start reading. This one's a little bit easier to understand. All right. Verse 1 of chapter 18. After these things, I saw another angel. Man, he must have how many angels have we seen in the last 10 chapters? There's a lot of angels doing a lot of crazy stuff. We see another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. So this is a powerful, powerful angel. If you could think about the power it would take to overthrow Satan's influence in all the nation's political, economic power, how strong of an angel must this be? Have you noticed recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, when anyone stands up to try and bring justice to an economic or political situation, what usually happens to that person? They get smashed. Okay? Why do they get smashed? And when I say smashed, I don't mean like drunk smashed. I mean like they get smashed. They get smashed partly because the people that are smashing them don't want to lose that power or that economic position. But even deeper than that, Satan is never going to relinquish his control of the nations through his influence of political and economic power. But it's coming to an end. So this great angel comes down from heaven, verse 2, and he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations of the earth have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality. That's very similar to what we just read in chapter 17, right? In chapter 17, they were drunk with the wine of her immorality of false religion. In chapter 18, the nations are drunk with the wine of her immorality of economic and political power. We'll see that as we go. And the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And here we go. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. There's the economic insight. The word merchant there is not a store owner. The word merchant there refers to the broker of businesses. Merchant is the one that brings the stuff from China. It's not the shop owner downtown Auburn. It's the one that's getting rich by bringing all the goods and services into the country. That's the merchant. And they have become drunk with her immorality, rich by the wealth of her sensuality. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." What is God doing? He's telling his people to what? What does he say there? Okay, yeah, verse 4. Come out of her. What is the her? It's the woman that represents economic and political power games. Come out of there. And it says there in verse 4, my people. Okay? So this is a call to God's people. Hey, the world is filled with power brokers for economic and political gain. And they're getting rich on the immorality of greed. Don't participate in that. Don't get caught up in that. So that you will not participate, verse 4, in her sins and receive her plagues. For her sins, the sins of the merchants, greed and power, her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. And then here we see that there's going to be payback. Verse 6, pay her back. Pay who back? Pay this woman, who is the symbol of economic and political power. Pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. And in the cup which she has mixed, mix twice as much for her, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously. To the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement if you think about that statement. What is greed saying? Greed is saying, the woman is saying, I've never been a widow. I've always had a husband. I've always had the nations of the earth. I've never been alone. And now they're saying, crush her. There's always been plenty of nations that are drunk with the wine of political and economic greed and taking advantage of people. She says, I've never been a widow, and I'm the queen. I'm the queen of greed. Verse 8, for this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine. Boom, there it is. God is going to wipe her out with plagues and death, with mourning and famine. For the Lord God who judges her is what? Strong. God is stronger than this woman. All right, you following that along? Okay, interesting. Verse 9. What we see is that there's lament on the earth. Listen, if the economic system breaks down, if the political power system breaks down, people are going to lament. People that are filthy rich because they're engaged in power greed are going to be greatly disappointed when God smashes the economic and political systems of the earth. Look what it says in verse 9 and forward. And the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city. For in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. Their cargoes. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. There's human trafficking there. Okay? Part of the evils of our world today is the economic power and political power gained through human trafficking. It's all going to be crushed. Verse 14, the fruit you long for has gone from you, and all the things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and men will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning and saying, woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. The economic systems of the world are going to collapse. The political systems of the world are going to come to ruin. Verse 17, and every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor and as many as make their living by the sea stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like the great city of Babylon? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. So there's mourning and there's weeping because the people and the nations of the earth that were gaining such wealth off of greed, economic programs, and greedy political systems has now come to ruin. But there are some who are rejoicing. Look at verse 20. Rejoice over her, O heaven. God's perspective, it's not a bad thing that this woman is crushed. It's actually a really good thing that all the false religions of the world are done away with, that all of the greedy economic and political systems are smashed. So heaven, their perspective, our perspective, because we'll be up there, our perspective is this is a rejoicing moment. Look what he says in verse 20. Rejoice, this is what the angel continues to tell John. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for what? For who? For you against her. Did you realize that part of the judgment of God on the political, economic, false religions of the world is because of how they've treated you as a follower of Jesus? And part of God's bringing smashing justice in one fair swoop is to show you that you were right and what they did to you was wrong. So if you're ever mistreated by political power, economic greed, if you're ever mistreated by a false religion, don't worry. God's going to bring justice for you because he's doing it here for you. For you. Let's keep going. Where are we at here? All the way down. 22. 21. No. Yes, 20. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Verse 21, then we see this decree is realized. In your notes there, I put degree is realized, so you might want to change that degree to decree. Verse 21, I'm at the very bottom of your notes there. The last sentence says the degree realized. It should say the decree is realized. And here it is, verse 21. Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer. And the sound of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer. All of the good glory celebrating immoral festivals of false religion and economic and political powerhouses is going to go silent. And no craftsman of any craft will be found in you any longer. And the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer. The mill is the production. Production factories are going to come to a standstill. Verse 23, and the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer. There's no longer any great celebrations because these powers have been crushed. Verse 23 continues, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, because of all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on the earth. Babylon is done. We can say amen to that. That the political corruption, the economic greed, the false religions that have been pervasive on the earth for all of our history are now done. And the father of all of that is who? Satan. Satan. That's why in chapter 19 and chapter 20, we see God take care of him. Okay? So, we are now finished with the tribulation. The tribulation. We're going to move now into the transition of moving into the great 1,000-year reign of Christ. All right, chapter 8, 17 and 18. Pretty good? Good stuff. We got a few minutes left before dessert. Let's answer a couple of questions if we can. Yes? Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. He's asking a question about the mark of the beast. It's interesting. He said in Deuteronomy chapter 6, God told his people to put his word on your foreheads, and they carried these little phylactery things. What God, I think, meant was keep it in your mind, not literally tattooed on your forehead. But the Pharisees took it ultra literal and actually had little headbands with little boxes that contain little scrolls of Scripture, and they would bang them on the forehead as they're walking through town, okay? And they had them on their hands. So, you know, that's a good point, that there have been throughout the Bible times when God's people have been told to mark yourself as a follower of His. Then the question was the mark of the beast. What is it? What would it look like? Can we be tricked into receiving it somehow? Okay, and the answer is no. You can't be tricked into receiving it, because as we see, we're going to see even a little bit more in the next couple of chapters. Those that took the mark of the beast did it intentionally to follow the beast. There has been some people that have said, you know, the COVID vaccine was the mark of the beast, and I would just respond carefully to that by saying you would know when you're taking the mark of the beast. And here's why you would know: because everyone that takes the mark of the beast is destroyed. And Christians would never take the mark of the beast. They would be the martyrs that are under the throne of God. So you're going to know when and again, it's in the tribulation period. Okay, we're not in the tribulation period now, so nobody's taking the mark of the beast. Remember, the beast is that political leader that takes control of the world, and he tells everybody to take the mark of the beast. So until we have a global leader that demands a mark, you know you're not taking the mark of the beast. Okay? That's good. Yes, Connie? Okay. The question is, where are the saints? Where are the Christians now? Are they gone? Are they still there? We're going to find that out in 2 weeks, where they're at right now, where they're at, okay? Okay? Let me just say a couple of things to that, okay? The way I wanted to teach this class is to go through the whole book of Revelation, and then on the last 2 weeks, week 9 and week 10, we're going to take the other mentioned events of the end times and put it all on a timeline to see where they fit, okay? What we do know for sure is that there are Christians here in the tribulation because they're identified and they're attacked, all right? So there are Christians in the tribulation. That's all I will say right now. That'll be fun. Keep us in suspense a little bit. Yeah, Glenn.
So, since tonight we're talking about the bottom line.
Yes.
So this falling of the nation, the economics and religion and stuff, is that during the tribulation, or is it like right at the end, or I mean, where's that kind of fall?
Well, okay, that's a good question. When does this happen? We know, we would guess it happens in the tribulation because that's where this theme is placed in the second storyline. We don't see anything in 17 and 18 that would tell us it should go over here. For example, 2 weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, when we looked at the first woman, which is, remember the first woman who the dragon was trying to attack, and the woman was Israel, and she was trying to give birth to a child. It said in there that the devil, or the dragon's been trying to eat the child from the beginning. Okay? Well, when did that happen? Okay? When did Satan try to kill the Messiah that came from the woman? When did that happen? Christmas, right? When Herod went and killed all the males 2 years and younger in Bethlehem. Okay? So we know that some of these timeline events are referring to much earlier, but there's nothing in 17 or 18 that would indicate it's anywhere other than in this timeline. Okay? Question back there? Yes?
The Babylon that's mentioned here in Revelation, is that historical Babylon, or is it referring to another nation or other political?
Yeah, that's a good question. When Babylon is mentioned here, is it referring literally to the city of Babylon? Is it referring to a nation? I think it's referring, the answer is yes. I think it's referring to Babel, like we read, like we saw in chapter 11 of Genesis, and what stemmed from that was these false religions, economic, political corruption, and that came out of Babylon. And Babylon, the city in the ancient world where Nebuchadnezzar ruled in the book of Daniel, would have been the epitome of that. So I think, my best guess, in God's mind, he was referring not only to the city of Babylon itself, but to these incredible false things and powerhouses of the world. He's lumping all of that kind of together. Here it says the woman is the city of Babylon. So it's got to be included in our understanding of Babylon. All right? One more? All right. Way to go. Thank you, everybody. Desserts out in the courtyard. And we'll see you next week for chapter 19 and 20. Okay? Yeah, good stuff.